Her letters that I've had the pleasure to read are proof of her life. Her mother tongue is English, and nonetheless, her Spanish and French were very fluent and unique as well. If in her literary production her spelling might seem anarchistic, this writing is phonetical and complies with its primary function of communicating, but in a very artistic way. Leonora Carrington would often write to her friends. Some of the letters have been published, like the letters of the period in which she lived with Marx Ernst. There's also fragments of correspondence with Edward James that Stefan referred to. And one of the letters that are more important, as far as I'm concerned, that have been published, are the letter to the French editor, Henri Parisot, in which Leonora authorizes her book to be published under memoirs, with the condition that this letter be included as a preface. She talks about her condition as a woman, and she differentiates her role of women in the surrealistic movement. And, well, I wanted to read a fragment of this letter. I'm no longer the beautiful youth that crossed Paris. I'm an old woman, an old lady who's lived a lot and has changed. If my life is worth anything, I'm the result of time. So I will never reproduce the old image. I will no longer be petrified in a non-existing youth. I accept the honorable deterioration. What I have to say now, to see through the monster. Do you understand this? No? Never mind. In any case, do what you like with this ghost, under the condition that you produce this letter as a preface to my book. As an old mole in a cemetery, I notice that I've always been blind. I want to get to know death to get rid of fear. And she ends by saying, if you tell me that I have a young mental framework, I will take offense. I have an old mind. Well, here we can see that in her letters there are very important moments of her artistic life. Here, her mind has changed. It's a milestone of ideas that she developed in other texts, like the acoustic trumpet, where Carmela Belasix and Marians, who are old women who are friends of hers and of Remedios Barrios. This gives us clues to interpret other texts, such as the mole in Mexican stories and texts regarding aging. Also, we will talk about the letters that haven't been published, unpublished letters. As part of my research, I've come across letters in the library. Sorry, this image, I wanted to show it to you because here, in that little box contained the catalogue of a surrealistic exhibition of 1955-1960 devoted to erotism. And it's like a very special object. It's like a ready-made, but made by Duchamp and Mimi Parent. And inside the catalogue, there's a letter by Leonora that is very, very interesting. I don't think I have time to read a fragment, but perhaps I can share it later on. Yes, a little, please? Okay. Well, I will read. Throughout a long time, I've been thinking about an exhibition like this, but I must confess that I see this as comical erotism. Among the sublime novelties in the USA, there seems to be an enormous apparatus that laughs in myriad octaves. Thinking in terms of this device, I thought of a room between a cathedral with a pendulum of laughter. This would be highly evocative. bestiario of erotica there would be choirs of children of chocolate, steel monks for masochists, pastel giraffes for voyeurists, up to 3 meters tall, bodies with beards, velvet, spiders, etc., etc. All this to the music of this organ. This is what she imagined for the curators of the exhibition. Well, let's go into the unpublished letters that are mainly the ones I came across in the Jacques Lucerne in the gallery in LA. And there are some copies in the archives of Balen and in Berlin. In these letters, we can see different documents. There are postcards, normal letters, there's photographs, drawings, stories, surrealistic games. Surrealistic games go from automatic writing to recipes and letters to imaginary characters. Who are these letters addressed to? Mainly to personalities of the surrealistic movement like Breton, Mamperet, and César Moro. We are talking about letters sent to New York, Paris, and Lima, Peru. Leonora Carrington and André Breton, main spokesman of surrealism, met in Paris and continued in contact in New York when they were both there as war refugees. It is there in New York where this correspondence started. Leonora invited Breton to come to her place. And there's testimonies of the surrealistic gatherings that took place there. In fact, Breton wrote an introduction to the story to the debutante in his anthology of black humor, and curiously there's a letter in which he refers to a banquet, and it is the banquet that he refers to in this introduction to the anthology. The introduction makes reference to this banquet. I can also read a brief statement. Let me look for it here. Perhaps later. So, let's go into the next slide. The next letter is Jacqueline Lambert, a French painter who has been in the shade because she was married to André Breton. And in one of her letters, Leonora writes to her, "We have come across a very beautiful convent with a beautiful kitchen where the nuns are very happy to prepare all the different Mexican dishes, and a fat kid appears. This ghost had disappeared 2 years ago. What a pity." So in these letters, especially to Jacqueline and André Breton, we can see elements of her work. For example, we can see that this encounter with this convent marked her in order to create the story on the origins of mole, this Mexican dish. And it's also an element of the cauldron, the kid in the cauldron, that is related to the moment in which, in the acoustic trumpet, Marion jumps into the cauldron as an alchemical transformation. These letters from the period in which she made her first trip to Mexico also refer to her first encounters with Remedios Varo, her impressions of Mexican mysticism. For instance, we also have letters, a letter to Alice Raon, a letter that is in New York, or Alice, I'm not sure. And you can see that the two painters were great friends. Leonora Carrington's imagination is a kind of antidote against her fears and her traumas. We can read in this letter that Chiqui, her husband, has left the city, and Leonora to calm her anxiety, started to build flying machines in order to not to suffer from immobility as an Easter egg. Leonora Carrington and the poet Perret, who was husband of Remedios Varo, met in Paris, and the correspondence that I came across corresponds to the period. Sorry, we were in César Moro. In the period during which he came back from his exile from Mexico to France. And in these letters, Leonora gives him news about their friends, talks about Chiqui, Remedios Varos, Cati Horna, about Sejourné, Larrea, Luis Buñuel. So it's a whole circle of exiles from Europe. And she also mentions interesting things about her artwork. For example, the fact that she was devoted to create anti-crucifixes that hang on the ceiling, which are like joyful crucifixes. The other letter preserved in this library in Jacques Doucet is dated December 1958. It's a letter in which Leonora narrates she narrates in a surrealistic way the way she was born. To talk about this today, which is her birthday, is greatly important. In this letter, she responds to a request from Perret, who was writing an anthology of surrealistic poetry and was looking for information not only about poets, but also about illustrators and painters who were surrealistic, and asked her for biographical information, simple information. In fact, the anthology has been published. Unfortunately, this was not published in it. And she, instead of saying I was born on such and such a date and so on and so forth, she says I was born by artificial insemination. I will read. My mother, as a young, enchanting bride, she was languidly despair because of the Anglo-Britannic coldness of her husband, and spent a night in the labs annexed to luxurious farmhouses in our family property. These were the favorite labs of the interseminal games of my maternal grandmother. I think that Leonora had this aspect of being highly interested in magical and mystical issues, but something that is very important as far as I can see is her sense of humor, and even the fact that she would even laugh at her own self. Just to summarize, I don't talk about César Moro, but anyway, in order not to extend myself more, she translated Memoirs from Below into Spanish and made an introduction to this text. And this introduction is it was written like a letter, and it's also a testimony of their friendship. In these letters, what we can see, the main elements that I have found in these letters that have to do with the way she wrote and the way that she expressed her way of seeing things in her literature, is her love for preciousness, ironically speaking. As far as dates are concerned, her letters are a puzzle. They're hardly ever dated, or it just says the day, or sometimes the month, but the year doesn't appear, rarely appears. And this factor is of key importance because the text and her letters are atemporal. They have no time. There's also automatic writing that she carried out, and I think that Leonora wrote her letters without copies, without editing, and that gave them a very spontaneous, an unequal spontaneous nature. And lastly, there's the poetical value of her correspondence. These letters have a marvelous aspect in which fantasy mingles with everyday reality. In this correspondence, for example, time is up. Here we have a photo. Your time is up, sorry.